It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce Miqdaad Versi this evening. My name is Shahid, and I thank AMI for the opportunity to chair this event. Miqdaad is an independent management consultant with expertise in property, travel and finance. He graduated from the University of Oxford with a first-class honours degree in mathematics. Miqdaad holds a position of Assistant Secretary General and an Executive Committee member at the Muslim Council of Britain, a national representative Muslim umbrella body with over 500 affiliated national, regional, local organizations, mosques, charities and schools. He is a member of the Muslim Leadership Group for the Citizens Commission on Islam, Participation and Public Life, which was initiated by Citizens UK. Miqdaad is a board member for Rights Watch UK, an organisation that promotes just and accountable security by ensuring that measures taken by the UK government are compliant with human rights and international law. He is a coordinator of the Muslim Forum of Middlesex, an umbrella group for many Muslim organisations in Harrow. He is an executive committee member at the Shia International Community of Middlesex, also known as Mafal Ali, and part of the project team for the Salam Centre, which is their construction project, with a vision of holistic provision of services for the entire community. Miqdaad is a vanguard in protecting Muslim interests in the media. As a media spokesman, he has featured in numerous interviews on BBC News, BBC Newsnight, ITV, CNN, Sky News, BBC Arabic and Al Jazeera English. He is a contributor for The Guardian and The Independent, writing on social, political and religious affairs. Active on social media, 18,000 tweets. Miqdaad highlights the inaccuracies of the way Muslims are presented in the media, and how he challenges the media according to the Independent Press Standards Organization's code. Anger, as less than a third of Muslim nations sign up to coalition against ISIS in the Express. And because of his formal complaint, changed to correction, Muslim nations sign up to coalition against ISIS. Gunman, screaming, Allahu Akbar, opens fire in Spanish supermarket while wearing suicide vest filled with gasoline and gunpowder in the Mail Online. Corrected to remove the phrase screaming Allahu Akbar after the supermarket denied it. British Muslims are so cut off from society that they think 75% of the UK is Islamic in the Sun. Corrected to, well, this was incorrect. In fact, the review cited a survey of pupils in one largely Asian school who thought 50 to 90% of the population of Britain was Asian. We apologise for this error. I will introduce Miqdaad Versi by the headline of the story written about him by the BBC, and as featured on the Victoria Derbyshire programme in January, The Man Correcting Stories About Muslims.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that extensive introduction, a very nice one. Thank you for having me here and inviting me, and thank you all for coming, giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts about the reporting of Islam and Muslims in the media. What I'm going to try and do is, through a short introduction as to what kind of work I'm doing, the reason why it's so important, and then I'm going to look at some examples to show what's happened in recent times when it comes to print and broadcast media. I'm going to try and keep it quite short, keep it to half an hour, and give you the opportunity to ask as many questions as you'd like. So I thought I'd copy the article that Shahid talked about, The Man Correcting Stories About Muslims. What's very interesting is that what I've been trying to do is highlight the importance of an issue that affects us all. When it comes to many Muslim communities, and if you ask many people, what is the thing that really worries you, over and above health, economy, and things that worry everybody, what specifically worries you as a Muslim? And the vast majority will say the worries about hate crime against Muslims, the worries about wearing a headscarf in public, the worries about being able to be yourself in the public space. A lot of people are saying that. And when you ask them, what's the reason for that? They'll say, because of the way way that the media portrays Muslims. It's almost universal in terms of this being a serious issue. And for me, that because of that, I thought it was very important to focus on trying to correct that, do something about it. Because for us, it's not just about identifying an issue. It's not only about saying this is a problem, but it's about doing something about it, being proactive about it, highlighting the issue and making it known. And so I've written several pieces. Two of them are in the Independent and Guardian over there. Why the British media is responsible for the rise in Islamophobia in Britain. Now, my article is actually a bit more subtle than that, but they decided to do a sensationalist headline on that very topic, which is quite interesting in and of itself. And then the Guardian article, which says the UK media too often misrepresents Muslims with dangerous results. So I'm trying to get the topic out there. That's what matters. Because when people recognize that this is a serious issue, that's when action can be done to tackle it. So what are the kinds of things that we're seeing, and how do we see it? Well, when I've been putting things out there, we've now got newspapers recognizing it as an issue. You can see that the Independent Guardian, this is more on the left, I agree, of the media spectrum, recognize that British newspapers are accused of publishing a consistent stream of inaccurate stories about Muslims. That consistent stream is because every single few weeks I recognize there is a problem. In the last 6 months, over 25 different national newspaper articles have been corrected just due to complaints that I've made. Just imagine how many there are in general. There are hundreds and hundreds of stories about Muslims over any period of time. And over 25, just in the last few months, have been wrong, and this is not just slightly wrong, this is so significantly wrong that the regulator or they themselves have admitted and actually changed the articles. Now, this is something that is really worrying and dangerous. And the reason why it's so dangerous is because of what the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance says, for example. They're really critical of the UK media and the press regulator here. They say that they call hate speech in some traditional media outlets in the UK is a serious problem. And they talk about tabloids in particular. They've said that they urge the UK media to recognise the importance of this issue and avoid perpetuating prejudice. Well, this is such a hard... They are accusing, this is the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance. They're accusing the UK media of perpetuating prejudice, or even more than that, fueling prejudice against Muslims, and they go even further. They say that shows a reckless disregard, not only for the dignity of the great majority of Muslims in the UK, but also for the safety of Muslims in the UK. That's what the European Commission says. But let's go even further than that. The United Nations. They have a lot of things to do with their time in the United Nations, right? They're not just focused on UK media. This is one small thing that matters. But still, the United Nations rights chief highlighted the need to tackle UK tabloids, their vicious verbal assault on migrants and asylum seekers. They specifically called out the Sun, the Mail, and the Express in different places as newspapers that are fueling this prejudice. So not only the European level, talking about the United Nations level, saying how bad this problem is. And let's go even further. It is not just people saying things. It is actually supported by evidence through academic studies. The University of Cambridge talked about an atmosphere of rising hostility against Muslims fueled by the UK media. University of Leicester talked about how politicians and media fuel hate crime. Now these are academic studies. There's also a University of Cardiff report which says something similar. This is seriously worrying, where not only we recognise it, not only do the European Commission recognise it, not only do the United Nations recognise it, but academic studies support this idea that there is a serious problem out there. And it is a serious problem that actually has real consequences. So let me talk about some of those consequences. I don't know if you've seen some of the polling that's been done on this issue. You know, we have they do a lot of polls about different issues. And one of the ones to tell whether there's been scaremongering about this issue is when they say, for example, what proportion of the UK do you think is Muslim? Because if someone thinks there are lots of Muslims there, they must have been fed this diet of scaremongering that has led them to have that belief. The actual population of Muslims in the UK is about 4 to 5%, right? 4.8% of the UK population is Muslim. The average Brit thinks that the Muslim population is 17%. So that is 3 or 4 times how many there are. That's how bad. That's the kind of level we're talking about. Now, you may think, you know what, this is not a big issue. Let me just tell you one thing. There's one managing editor of a national newspaper who actually writes a lot of stories and has front-page stories about Muslims. And I had lunch with him because I was challenging some of the stuff he said, and I work in a constructive way. And I thought, let me just ask you, what percentage of Muslims do you think is in the UK? And he said 13%. This is someone, a managing editor of a national newspaper who really should know better. He thought 13% of the British population was Muslim. That's the kind of level that it's reached where, people who are in real positions of authority have no idea what they're writing about sometimes. And what does that lead to on the ground? Well, one poll says that 37% of the British population would support policies to reduce the number of Muslims in the UK. I'm not saying stop more coming in. I'm saying reduce the number of Muslims in the UK, according to one poll. Now, that was one poll by itself, you might say. There have been so many polls that show between 30 and 40% think there are too many Muslims in the UK. 30 to 40%. That is, every 2 or 3 people you see is probably thinks that you shouldn't be there. Or that there are too many of you here. That's a problem. That's not a society that's working towards community cohesion, where we're all together. Not at all. Actually, let's go even further. There was a poll done 10 years after 7/7, and it found out that over 50% of the British population believed that Islam, and not fundamentalist Islam, there was a distinction made between the two, believed that Islam poses a threat to Western liberal democracy. So this is what I'm talking about. Real impact on the ground. That's the views that people have about Muslims. And that's excluding the huge rise in actual hate crime against Muslims. That's excluding the fact that Muslims on the ground have a perception that they are being targeted far more than ever before. That's excluding that. I'm talking about what are the views of the British public who read these newspapers. And that's what it is. And you know what? It goes even further. It's not just the average Joe on the street. Young children have this same perception now. The largest ever poll done of young children between the ages of 10 and 14 in The Guardian, 2015, showed that 31% of those young children between the ages of 10 and 14 thought that there are too many, the Muslims are taking over England. 31% of young children thought that Muslims are taking over England. What is happening to our society if that's the case? Where are they getting this from? They hear things in the media, their parents hear things, and these prejudices spread. It is clear, it is unequivocal, it is dangerous. So, where is it coming from? Let's look at some of those examples. Because whilst we often recognize that problem, we sometimes struggle to be able to articulate it clearly. We struggle to be able to show the evidence for what we're saying. I've brought an evidence base. I've showed you what's happened on the ground. Let's look at the evidence of what these newspapers are actually doing. Now, a few things I thought I'd just start with, which is, when it comes to terrorism, one of the things that people often say, and their response to everything is, well, are Muslims really doing most of the bad things in society? Isn't it the reality that there are Muslims who are doing this? So it's fair for people to have these views. Well, let's look at when a study was done of media outlets, and they showed a terror attack, one done by a Muslim, one done by someone who's not a Muslim. Which one do you think got far more coverage? the one done by a Muslim. According to The Independent here, Muslims commit far fewer terrorist attacks than non-Muslims, the research found. But when attacks by Muslims do happen, they are written about 4.5 times more than other attacks. That's the research from SSRN, which was entitled, "Why do some terrorist attacks receive more media attention than others?" And the problem is that when people get this standard stream of media about Muslims, that's what creates this impression. According to Lancaster University, another academic study showed that the right-wing papers mentioned Muslims and extremism together, and for every one moderate Muslim mentioned, 21 examples of extremist Muslims are mentioned in the British press. 21 times. This is the diet that people feed off on the street. But I think as a whole, let's look at this in a structured way. I see three main groups of challenges within the media, within the print media in particular. The first challenge is to do accuracy. They get things just factually incorrect. The second group is to do with scaremongering. Well, it might be factually correct, but it's making this idea that it's far worse than it actually is. And the third area is bias. And I'll look at each one of those and a few examples on those right now. So the first one is accuracy. Now, there was a story, and I think Shahid mentioned it, where you have the Sun here, the Mail Online, and the Express, all using the same story. They say, terror in Spain, gunman screaming Allahu Akbar opens fire in supermarket. Or the Mail Online, gunman screaming Allahu Akbar opens fire in Spanish supermarket while wearing a suicide vest filled with gasoline and gunpowder. Now, just to explain what actually happened. There was an individual who spoke Basque. You know the area in Spain, the Basque region? No Arabic, he didn't know Arabic, he was not Muslim, he had no understanding probably of what Allahu Akbar meant. He never said Allahu Akbar. He was someone who's speaking in Basque and was just shouting. He potentially had a mental illness. There was nothing to do with Muslims in any regard, and still this is what they put out. And what is really interesting, and we'll come to this in a second, is that the press, whilst all of these newspapers, after I complained directly to them, changed their articles because they knew it was wrong. They changed it immediately. Some of them apologized for their error. One of the newspapers refused to apologize and refused to meet me to try and improve their coverage. So I took them to the press regulator, and guess what? The press regulator said they were fine. The press regulator said they were fine. A challenging situation. And we'll come to the issues of the press regulator in a second. Another example. Enclaves of Islam see the UK as 75% Muslim. Now, so some people say, you know what? This is just the Express, the Mail and the Sun. They're the right-wing tabloids. They always do this. We know that. Now, firstly, they have huge reach, right? The Sun and the Mail have over 1 million people read their newspapers, get their newspapers. The Express thing is 400,000. So you've got 2.5 million people getting these newspapers every day. This is not a side thing on the street. The Mail Online has millions of people who read their website every month. So whilst it is the right wing, let's not pretend that this is not something that's quite popular as well. So, but some people say, it's the Mail and the Express, it's different. But guess what? Even the Times, now the Times is seen as one of the most influential newspapers in the UK. It is seen as something which is the bastion of liberalism here in the UK, as something which is very respected for the work it does. The Sunday Times wrote an article with, look at the size of that headline. Enclaves of Islam see the UK as 75% Muslim. Now, guess what? When they did it, the Mail on Sunday, the Mail Online, the Express and the Sun all followed them. Okay. But the Sunday Times, even they did it. And the basis of this, let me just emphasize what happened. There is a report out there. It's called the Louise Casey report. In that report, it states that there was one school in the whole country they found where it was in a majority Asian area. And so what happened was that the kids thought that the whole country was majority Asian. Now that's clearly not right. They need to make sure they open up a bit more, and that's something that needs to be looked at. But that was one school. That report, which mentioned that one fact, led to this headline. Enclaves of Islam see UK as 75% Muslim. And it's far worse than the actual article and not what it says. The whole of this story is built up on this idea that Muslims are so isolated that this is what they think. And the article and the report mentioned nothing about Muslims on this issue. It was about Asians. And of course, you can see that the way that the corrections take place, whilst the headline was that big, the correction, as you can see where it is in the bottom right hand side of that page, I tried to blow it up, and even then you can't see it. The correction is there. Which they did apologize for their error. And it just gives you some idea of the challenges we're facing. But the accuracy goes much further than that. It's not just about being inaccurate about things to do with terrorism, about really, really quite big things like terror in Spain, or isolation and integration. It goes further than that. It goes to the very nature of who Muslims are. And that's where the challenge lies. So Ramadan, some people think, oh my God, Ramadan, it's something, Muslims fast, it's a bit weird, okay, fine. But you know what, it's worse than that. The Sun decided to have a story saying, Ramadan train wreck. Muslim train driver crashed after going without food or drink for 15 hours during Ramadan. Now, they claimed that rail accident experts, they actually said this directly in the article, and I quote it here. Rail accident experts claimed his fast caused the rush hour derailment that led to 3 days of disruption. There was actually, this is how unbelievable this is. There was actually a report done on this issue, and the report concluded there was no link, no way to prove that Ramadan had anything to do with the train crash. No proof whatsoever. The report that these people are trying to cite said the exact opposite of what these guys are saying. And guess what? Nobody called them up on it. I mean, I complained and we got it changed. And they pulled it down, and the press regulator, for all its faults, did find them guilty of a serious breach of their code. But it's ridiculous that this type of inaccuracy, how can it pass through the editorial process? How can it even happen? The point of a newspaper, as many of us are aware, is to report facts. When you talk about journalism, the very essence of journalism is accuracy. It's about how are you able to challenge authority. And in fact, let me go even further. I will say, with all real strength, the media is a vital part of our democracy. If we don't have a media able to challenge authority, we don't have a democracy. You can't just have a government by itself without a media to hold it to account, or to hold any authority to account. You need a strong media. We need to strengthen our media. But how do we go about strengthening that media? Well, first thing is get rid of inaccuracies. Because these types of inaccuracies do something very, very, very dangerous. They undermine the trust that the public has in the media. Did you know that today, or not necessarily today, but at the moment in general, the latest poll suggests that the average Brit on the street has a similar amount of trust with a journalist, as they have of politicians and of estate agents, like 25%. 25% of the British population trust journalists. This is problematic. If us as a society can't trust our media, how are they able to hold government to account? How is our democracy supposed to be strong if we don't have a strong media that the public trusts? And one of the big reasons for that is the way that they do report, the way that they are inaccurate in their reporting sometimes, and some parts of the media. And I don't want to say all parts of the media are, and we'll come to some other bits in a second. But I want to talk about the one other thing. So we're talking about Ramadan. Let's go even further. The Express said new £5 notes could be banned by religious groups as bank can't promise their halal. The bank can't promise that those £5 notes, the actual money, is halal. Now, Not one Muslim group said this, by the way, in the public domain at least, that I'm aware of. The Express recognized that no Muslim group said this about halal. But guess what? The press regulator thought that was fine. There was no justification for this at all, whatsoever. But the press regulator thought this was okay. Gives you some idea of this press regulator. I missed another example, which just happened last week. I don't know if you saw during Easter time, the Mail Online decided to do a story saying that Christian Easter eggs were not allowed to be put on Sainsbury's and Asda's shelves, but instead they were putting halal Easter eggs. Now, I'm not sure how many people are aware of the difference between a normal Easter egg and a Christian Easter egg, for starters. But let's put that aside for a moment, given the fact that, Easter eggs are not necessarily any more Christian than anything else. But let's say that there is such a thing as a Christian Easter egg. The fact that they are talking about trying to say that these Christian Easter eggs weren't allowed on shelves, but they were allowed to put halal Easter eggs, there weren't any halal Easter eggs. It was basically one of these producers of Easter eggs saying all their products are halal because guess what? They're an Easter egg. It's chocolate. It's not, there's no alcohol in them because guess what? Easter eggs are generally eaten by young children, so they generally don't put alcohol in Easter eggs. And so they just said these are all halal. All our products are halal. And somehow that was created this big furore. And guess what? It doesn't. The thing is, people think this doesn't matter, but it does matter because these types of inaccuracies are picked up by the far right. The first story that I mentioned about government screaming Allahu Akbar was picked up by Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson is the former head of the English Defence League, the far right extremist group, who now buddies up with the Britain First. Enclaves of Islam in Britain see the UK is 75% Muslim. That was picked up directly by the English Defence League and spread on in their far right crazy Twitter in this case. Britain First also decided to follow this. Now the reason why this matters, the reason why this is so important is because when the far right say things, I'd say the majority of the middle ground think these guys are crazy. It's the English Defence League. Why should anyone listen to them? But when they start citing national newspapers to support their far right narrative that Muslims are the problem, and every time they're able to get real newspapers, national newspapers, to support their narrative, what happens to that middle ground? It starts swaying towards the far right. And that's exactly what happened with this Easter egg example. All of these far right individuals shared some of these things and started commenting in this way. It is very, very dangerous. And so that's all about accuracy and massive inaccuracy in the way that things are reported. But it's not just inaccuracy. Scaremongering really matters, and that's where this idea comes from. More than 50 million Muslims are willing to support those who carry out terror attacks to defend their religion, according to a migration expert. 50 million Muslims, they're saying, is willing to back violence and terror. And they're using that as part of their discussion on migration. I mean, it's serious. I mean, it's clearly nonsensical to make such statements, but that's the type of headlines that are spreading. And some people might argue, yes, but in the article it explains where it comes from, that only one person said it, and in reality, how many people read the article? According to one study, and I think this is a massive underestimate, but 60% of people only 40% of people will read an article rather than just the headline in a week. So they may read loads of headlines. The vast majority of people basically just read headlines, if anything else. And if headlines are the way that many people read their media, including social media and other places, because that's what they share in social media, just imagine what they're going to see. But let's go further. It's not just about the words that he used. Like I said here, 50 million Muslims. It's the actual images. Look on the left-hand side there. It's a cutout and keep guide. In other words, keep it at home. Keep it so you can see. here's what terrorists look like. Not what they say, not what they do, but what they look like. Well, why do you think people get this idea that the terrorists look a certain way? This is the type of ridiculous craziness. This is the Sun. This is a national newspaper with millions of readers. And they're saying, here's a cut-out in heat guide of what terrorists look like. Not what they say, not what they do. This is what they look like. I can't emphasize how bad this left thing is. It is outrageously bad. But it's nothing you can do with it, and the regulator would not stop something like that. The right-hand side is a front-page example of 1 in 5 Brit Muslims' sympathy for jihadis. Other than the fact it was a massive misrepresentation of the poll that was there, I mean, it's not just he was wrong in every single one. They had to correct it, and they did put a correction on page 2 later, after a number of people, including me, complained. But this is outrageously bad. On the front page of it, this is not only people who read the Sun, it's people who pass by the Sun on the street and see it. That's what they'll see. 1 in 5 British Muslims have sympathy with jihadis. Just imagine this kind of thing. I mean, if you hear this again and again, all these examples I've shown you, if you keep on seeing this stuff, what are you going to think? Well, it's going to be those types of percentages I showed earlier. 37% of British Muslims believe that the British population think that would support policies to reduce the number of Muslims in the UK. It's that scare, that fear of Muslims. That's the kind of thing that will happen. Other types of scaremongering are a nativity scene is banned in case it offends one of the 4 Muslims living in a Belgian town. Now, it happens every Christmas and Easter, but there's always something which tries to attack Muslims for not allowing Christmas to take place, even though many of us, I think including in Birmingham, a few of you may have even gone to the local church for midnight mass. I know that I normally do as well. I mean, but anyway, put it that way. Nativity scene is banned in case it offends one of the 4 Muslims living in a Belgian town. In actual fact, it wasn't banned for that reason. It wasn't banned at all. They just decided not to do it because of other reasons. There's a big fact checker website out there called Snopes. It looks at these things and it called it a complete inaccuracy as well. But this creates this idea, this fear about Muslims that we are trying to take over. We are trying to ban what British people think is sacred, or we're trying to spread our hatred. For example, shot poll: 4 in 10 British Muslims want some aspect of Sharia law enforced in the UK. What do you think the average guy on the street thinks Sharia law means? Chopping your hands off and stuff like that, right? This was just saying that 4 in 10 British Muslims may think that, you know what, they want to, for example, in their domestic life, may want to follow the Sharia. It's seriously nothing to do with this, and this is scaremongering at its worst. Now, you may think, you know what, you've got accuracy and scaremongering, but there should be some way to regulate this, right? Some way to look over this, to stop this happening. I mean, we live in a society which runs by rules. So there is something called the press regulator, the Independent Press Standards Organization. There's another regulator out there as well, but this is the main one. But let me tell you a little bit about it, other than the fact that I've shown the examples of things that it didn't take into account. I mean, they have identified and agreed with me on a number of occasions that, and actually ruled against newspapers in some cases. But let me give you a bit about it. On their board, on the board of this press regulator, so this is a regulator which is supposed to look after the press and oversee and ensure that the press lives up to the highest professional standards that the press itself has agreed and signed up to. On the board of this press regulator is the Sun columnist Trevor Kavanagh. Now, you may think, who is this Trevor Kavanagh person? Well, firstly, he attacked a complainant for complaining to Ipso in his column. So he's part of a press regulator that's supposed to say, complain to us. The whole point of this press regulator is to encourage people to complain so that things can get better. He, as someone who's on the board of this press regulator, publicly attacked a complainant for complaining. And he's still on their board. He himself has been found guilty of breaching the code that he's supposed to be overseeing. I did a complaint against him and won that complaint, and the Sun had to retract and was ruled in breach of Ipso's code. So he has breached the code that he is supposed to oversee. And then add to that even further, he is such a controversial figure, and I think controversial is a nice word. Other than the fact he called Fatima Manji for wearing her headscarf on public, he called her provocative for doing that. Okay, maybe he has a right to have his own view on that. But let's go further than that. He decided to actually say publicly that there are Muslim areas in which wife beating and marital rape are standard, according to a case report. I mean, okay, other than the fact that there's no way to justify this in any way whatsoever, the press regulator went on his favour and said that was okay for him to say. But anyway, this person is on the board of this, it's on the organisation supposed to oversee the press. So this is a challenge we face. But even the regulator itself has individuals like that who are supposed to be helping run the organisation. They don't seem to be willing to even take action to tackle anything. But you know what? All of that is print media. On the broadcast side, as a whole, it's much better. There are far fewer examples of inaccuracy when it comes to broadcast. But let me give you 2 examples. ITV said half of UK Muslims would not report extremism. That's just not true. It was massively wrong. It was based on a policy exchange report which was misinterpreted, and I told them and they pulled it down. But I mean, it's still not good enough because it comes after the fact. And finally, I'll give you another example, which is the BBC. Now, I'm only giving one example. There are lots out there. Now, the Today programme, it's a Radio 4 programme. It's seen as one of the flagship programmes of the BBC. Listened to by the Prime Minister, supposedly. That's how important this show is. They decided to invite someone called Frank Gaffney. I don't know if you know who Frank Gaffney is. He's the guy who said that Hillary Clinton's running, someone who's supporting her, Huma Abedi, was a Muslim Brotherhood infiltrator. This is the person who said, you know this picture on the right-hand side, it was part of an operation by the US government called Defense Shield. He said that the US government had been infiltrated by Muslims to such an extent that the image that was used by Barack Obama is actually a crescent and a star. And look, Muslims are taking over the country. That's the craziness we have. This is Frank Gaffney, proper Islamophobe. When people talk about who are the biggest Islamophobes in the world, he's one of the top ones. Guess how the BBC Today programme introduced him on Radio 4? A security expert who has advised the President Reagan government. They didn't give any introduction, any idea of the type of person this was, and yet he was talking there about Muslim-related issues. And we will see soon how the BBC have responded to my complaint on that. Hopefully it will be coming out publicly. And look, I've said a lot about negativity. I'd like to share a bit more positivity. There's a lot of stuff where people are trying to do good, and we may not agree or disagree with how good it actually ends up being. But there are broadcasters out there who do a whole load of very positive shows about Muslims, who try and make something positive out there. Extremely British Muslims is one example where some people spend a whole 2 years just to create a couple of documentaries about Muslims. And you know what? There is now an understanding that this is shared by a wider range of the population. People recognize there is an issue here, that Muslims, that migrants, and minority groups are being talked about very negatively in the press. There's a recognition of the issue in many cases. And I've been fortunate enough to actually see, at least in one newspaper, and I can't say which one because they think it will undermine their right-wing presence, where I've seen the way that they report about issues has changed just by talking to them, just by engaging, not shouting at them, not saying that they're crazy, although, but actually trying to engage with them and change them and say, you know, I met with the managing editor of one of these newspapers. I talked to them, I talked to a few of them, but one in particular, who actually seems to have understood my concern and really understood it. And they have now had far more positive stories about Muslims on their online site. They have toned down their negative side. Of course, they still have some negative, they're a right-wing press organisation. But there is possibility of change. And that's what I wanted to get out at the end. That whilst the terrain is tough, whilst it's really difficult, we all have a duty to make a difference. We all can make our difference in our own ways. And as a whole, things can get better. And let's hope they will. Thank you very much. It's a lot.
Thank you so much, Miqdaad. Maghrib is at 8:27, so we have a little window for some question and answers. We have a roaming mic. If we could please, if you could forgive me for asking, if we could please keep the question or comments quite succinct. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the talk. Please take my attendance as me endorsing the work you've done. However, I'm going to be very critical. The current people we have in the media, from the perception of the layman, myself, seem to be angry Muslim men and have always been reporting on Muslim issues from the time of Raghi Omar, probably my infancy. Remembered him as the first media face, which was actually Muslim. There are many groups which have problems like this. Dr. Morali sat next to you. I'm sure he's encountered thousands of patients who said, oh, can I have this wonder drug? To the extent that the National Health Service on their Choices website have a section where they debunk all of the studies publicised by the same very media outlets we're targeting. Only last week, Kelly Mackenzie criticised a footballer and a whole town, and they decided, both teams who have one of the biggest rivalries in football, to exclude them from entering their site. Do you think we can change tack as Muslims and also make very good friends? And healthcare is a brilliant sector which we have interest in as Muslims and generally Asians as well. And do you think there's a different approach which we can achieve a lot more from that? So hopefully it's not too critical. Maybe I'm not aware of something you've done.
Yeah. So there are lots of things here. Firstly, when it comes to the types of people who are out there in the media, if I was to say who is the most senior British Muslim in the media at the moment, it would probably be Miqdaad Versi, who is a British Muslim woman, and who has never talked about Muslim issues any more than anybody else, although she cares about these issues as much as others. If I was to talk about some of the others, all of them actually are probably not Muslims focused. The vast majority of Muslims within the media hardly touch Muslim-related issues. In fact, I'd say it's a very small minority who do. And I'd say that given the importance of the issue and the way that other people are framing the narrative of Muslims, I think actually Muslims have a duty to try and change that narrative. Now, when it comes to issues like don't other groups also face, or other situations also face demonization in some respect, I think when it comes to migrant groups, I think definitely, and I'm working very closely with Citizens UK on migrant relations and refugees and the way that they are being reported in the media, training them up to be able to do similar things. But what I'm trying to show with just the work that I'm doing and recognizing that accuracy, that there is a system that newspapers have agreed to. They have agreed that they will not be inaccurate in the way that they report things. But when they do so, there are different options that you can take. One option is to just say, here's the facts, here's actually what happened. How many people actually read that? Basically none. And same with the NHS website. I mean, nobody as a whole will see the facts. People on the ground, you ask them what they think about the NHS and certain things, they'll believe what they read in the media. And so that tact has not worked. And Muslims have tried that tact for decades. It's just not worked. Another tact is to try and get newspapers constructively to change their approach by first talking and engaging with them, and using both a carrot and stick approach to change the mentality of the way they work. And that carrot and stick approach is, I'm not going to get the press regulator to say you're a bad boy in public. Just make the change. You recognize this is wrong, change it. And don't do it again. I mean, that constructive attitude has actually worked in one newspaper, as I said. And other newspapers, at least, I'm hoping, so this is something that I found quite interesting. I don't know if it's a positive or negative, but a couple of managing editors now have told me, we know you're watching. Now, what matters is that they realize there is a concern here, and they're going to be careful to ensure there's due diligence. I'm not asking for special favours. In fact, I don't want special favours. I think special favours are bad because it gives the impression that Muslims are different. But I want fairness, not favours. I want equality, not discrimination. I want there to be something that is accurate and in line with the democratic ideals that we have as a nation, which is a strong media, which is trustworthy. And I would say right now, when it comes to broader Muslim public, the media is trusted very, very, very poorly. So one of the things that can be done to tackle it is by trying to improve the way the reporting happens. But there are many other things, and I'm not saying this is the sole answer. In fact, I think that this is only one very small part of a bigger picture. Other things are things about religious diversity within the media. We need more Muslims to be within the media landscape. If you actually see, there are a tenth, Muslims are massively, disproportionately underrepresented within media outlets. In fact, whilst there 4 or 5% of the British population is Muslim, only 0.5% of the media are Muslim. And that's in the general media. Think about the upper echelons of the media society, where it's even less. So there's a big part of requiring inclusion within the media and encouraging that diversity. Because when you have a more representative media, that's going to result in better stories and better understanding. And there's another area for Muslims where Muslims have to get out there and try and share this is actually the reality on the ground. But we have to recognize the agenda of certain groups and the fact it has an impact. So whilst with many other things, the views on the NHS, etc., there are huge problems with that. This has an impact on the ground, on millions of people, on how they go out. I know people who will not go out on the street after certain stories have come out because they're worried, because in particular Muslim women that I have met who have told me they are worried to go out on the street. So I think there is a different angle when it comes to demonization of and discrimination, because on NHS and other things like that, some people might argue there is a question of politics there. People have a different view.
I think you would misunderstood slightly in the sense that, for example, there's a lot of things like immunisation and
which is factually incorrect.
Factually incorrect. I'm suggesting that we actually work together with these people to lobby the government to get rid of the regulator or to change the regulator to be fit for purpose. Yeah. This is the tack.
So that's happening as well. So that's also happening big time. So there's a significant. There are these consultations that happen. For example, when the Editors Code Committee wants to review the way the actual rules of the media, all of us work together to make sure we're all able to submit things to these organisations to say this is what happens. But what's very important is that those who are experts in the topics they're expert about write about them. So Muslims, for example, I in particular have looked at this. I would love to look at migrant issues. I would love to look at immunisation. I just don't have the expertise all the time. So I focused on one issue because focus matters. Expertise matters. And so what we have done is that's exactly what we've done. We started working with many other organisations of Muslim and non-Muslim and faith-related issues or again other issues to try and work on these things because it's vital. And it is to just do on Muslim-related issues without looking at the wider society is basically pointless. It's not pointless now. It has value, but it doesn't have the same value as what you said, and something that I'm doing and I think is vital to happen.
Perhaps if we could have one last short question and short answer before we finish for prayers. Sorry, I didn't see that.
That's okay, no problem. I've lost my voice anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Thank you. Brother, have the media in Iran have done enough to show the Persian population, including the Arabs, also the diverse society of Iran. What is the difference between a cultural issue and a religious issue, and whether in Iran itself differentiation between Islam as a religion, Shia, liberal, Sunni, and Islam in politics, and whether the Shia group in Iran and in Iraq progressing the Arab and the Persian culture or regressing it, and what is real participation in economic and political and social issue of intermarriage between the Sunni and the Shia in Iraq. Specifically, there is a high level of intermarriage between, which raised the recent question of that marriage, whether to be increased or decreased, whether Quran can support that marriage, say yes or no, or condition that marriage. Or have we in Arab enjoyed the Persian culture and the vice versa? The Persian also enjoyed the Arab culture, or whether because the issue of Shia is very more than the issue of Salafi. Salafi are not very also aware about it much, but I see the issue is quite important. But the media has done, I see recently in Lebanon, very young Shia imam in the media to kiss or like worship the American flag, where American flag are killing the unknown number of the black minority, the indigenous deprived people there. American flag to be worshipped in Jewish theology, in Christian theology, Muslim theology, or whether he actually worship American economy or American power, and whether the Shia leader certified that action or denounced it or just clarified that if to worship American flag right issue or wrong. While Imam Muhammad Abdu, when he visited France 100 years ago, his statement is quite clear. He said, his comment about France administrative progress and economic progress, he found very good institution. They said, I'm amazing people, not Muslims, but working with the Islamic way.
Forgive me to ask, could you please
But
complete the question?
Muslim world are not very actually advanced in this system of administration and economic advancement. So what is the media doing this, brother? Because I myself, should I worship American flag that the Shia on air or not?
Thank you for your question. Thank you.
I'm not, to be honest, I'm not that much of an expertise on media outside the UK. When it comes to UK media in particular, there's a massive lack of understanding on most religious, on these types of nuances within the Muslim community. I mean, they just don't understand it. One national newspaper decided to have a page where they said that if you're a Deobandi Muslim, that means that you can't abide by British values. I mean, these are a big proportion of Sunni communities, and saying if you're a Deobandi, it means you can't be a British citizen and abide by British values. These types of broad brush statements, inaccuracies.
Keep it between Sunni or Shia. Please don't go there when they go to Brerui. Keep it between.
Even between Sunnis and Shias, I mean, the understanding of the general British press about these things is very, very shallow. There are some who happen to have a lot of expertise, a bit more. Things like Patrick Coburn and Rob Fisk and others happen to understand this better, and they do write better on these things. But when it comes to in the UK British press in particular, that's the only area that I can speak on with any real authority. There is a massive lack of understanding about basic Muslim-related issues. So most of the things that you mentioned and others, they don't understand. They wouldn't be able to report it in a reasonable way, and in some cases they failed and have demonstrated their inability to understand these nuances in a very, very dangerous way. So I recognize a serious idea, and this was something actually I should have mentioned earlier. Things that we as Muslims can do is working on religious literacy and improving the understanding of Islam within broader journalists, because it's a big part of what they're writing about right now, and they need to understand, those who write about the topic need to understand the background to be able to write with it with any authority.
Thank you very much, Miqdaad. And please forgive me for being timely. I didn't want to delay the evening prayers. Thank you for respecting the request to be succinct in questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get all the time to ask questions. I hope Miqdaad may be available after prayers just to informally ask further questions. A final announcement from AMI. There will be a research seminar on the 27th of April by Dr. Mansour Ali from the Cardiff University on shifting discourse in the Muslim organ donation debate. Check out the Al-Mahdi Institute on Facebook, Twitter, or sign up to the mailing list on the table outside to find out more. Adhan will be recited in 1 minute. Prayers will be had in this chapel. The chairs will be moved to the side, and refreshments will be available upstairs after. There are also other facilities and toilet facilities on the floor above. Thank you so much. Salawat.